This podcast is brought to you by WRFL, Radio Free Lexington. Find us online at wrfl.fm. Catch us on your FM radio while you're in Central Kentucky at 88.1 FM, all the way to the left. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to subscribe.
Hi, and welcome to From the Woods, Kentucky. I'm Renee Williams, and I'm here with my co-host, Lhotka. Today in studio, we have Billy Thomas. Billy is an extension forester in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky. It's a pleasure to have you in studio today, Billy.
Well, thank you all for having me.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about resources for woodland owners. But before we get started doing that, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at UK.
Okay, so I've been working in my current position as an extension forester for about the last 11 years or so. And in that capacity, I really serve woodland owners across Kentucky. I work on campus, but I do have statewide responsibility. So a lot of what I do is go and do educational programs for woodland owners across the state. That could be field days or workshops or seminars or a variety of outlets. We also develop a lot of educational resources. But I really got into forestry and extension many years ago. I grew up in southeastern Kentucky in Bell County and Middlesboro area down there, and I love being outside. You know, it's a beautiful area. Kentucky has so many beautiful forests, and really enjoyed playing around in those forests and spending time with them. I went to the military after high school, and I really couldn't wait to get back to Kentucky. And it didn't take me long to find forestry as a career, so I've been blessed to be able to do some things that I really enjoy.
That's good. So can you tell us our listeners a little bit about extension, how it's set up here in the state?
Yeah, many people may not realize that extension is a big part of the university's mission. We are a land-grant university, and what that means is we have basically 3 core missions, and those missions include research, and they also include instruction for our undergraduate and graduate students, but also taking that knowledge that we gain not only here at the University of Kentucky, but other institutions of higher learning, and delivering that to the people, putting it in consumable forms that the lay audience can use this research to improve their lives, improve practices. So extension is really extending the university. And fortunately here in Kentucky, we have a lot of extension folks all across the state. Kentucky's blessed to have 120 counties, and in each of those counties, we have a cooperative extension office. And that office is made up of local folks that are serving local needs, but they're really supported by folks here at the university and other universities that give them that educational information, that research-based knowledge that they need to pass on to clientele. So they serve in a variety of capacities at the local level. We have agents that are designed to work on agriculture and natural resources. We have agents that work on 4-H and youth development. We also have agents that work in family and consumer sciences. So it depends on what you're interested in. There is something really for all of our folks here in Kentucky to get something out of our local extension offices. Some of these offices have also expanded to have fine arts agents. We also have some natural resource agents. So depending on the needs of the county. And these extension programs are supported heavily at the county level. So it's a real partnership between the University of Kentucky and those local counties and getting good education and good information out to the people across Kentucky.
So if you have a pressing question that you can't get answered, your extension agent would be a good person to start with.
Yeah, certainly. I had the pleasure of being a county extension agent for a few years before I came to the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. And in that capacity, you really never know what's going to come through the door, or you never know what's going to be on the other end of the phone call. So we try to be there for them and really connect people with the information and resources they need. So yes, I would encourage folks, if you don't know your county extension office, get to know them. They're a beautiful resource that's there to help you and try to make the community more vibrant, more sustainable, and all around better.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about resources for woodland owners. So can you tell us give us a little background, I guess, about Kentucky? So how much is forested and how many woodland owners do we have?
Sure. So Kentucky is about half forested. We say 49%, but we round it up to half. And that's a lot of land, and it really does not get the credit I think it deserves. Obviously, I'm biased, and I think our forests are extremely important, and they do a lot for us. But when you have a resource that covers half the land area, it's really important. And Kentucky, like most of the eastern United States, the majority of the land is privately owned. So we have individual families out there that own property. They may only own a few acres, or they may own thousands thousands of acres. So we have approximately around 420,000 or so woodland owners, and they break that down to about 155,000 ownerships is what we estimate. So owners and ownerships, there could be multiple people in one ownership, but if you think about it, about 155,000 kind of ownerships, and that may be a husband and wife, it may be brothers or sisters or cousins or whoever it may be, but usually it's family. So the majority of our woodlands, almost 80%, is owned by families or those individuals. We have about 10% or so of the woodlands that are in public land. That could be like the Daniel Boone National Forest, land between the lakes. State forests are also considered public land. There's also parks that we have. So a variety of those places take up around 10%. And then the rest is really made up of corporate entities and others that own that. So it's mostly private family woodland owners in Kentucky. And that's my main audience that I try to serve.
Mm-hmm. So tell us why it's important for woodland owners to care for their woodlands.
Starting out as a county extension agent, I was working with farmers largely, and farmers here in Kentucky, many are also woodland owners, and they would come to me for questions, maybe about tobacco or cattle production or vegetable production or whatever, but it would only be a small part of their property was really in that type of production, with the vast majority of it was covered in forest land. So I think woodland owners need to think of their forest land as an asset. You're paying taxes on it. You're responsible for it, so treat it like an asset that it really is. Woodlands, when they're managed properly, they can help you achieve whatever your goals or objectives are, and they could be really more productive and healthier. So I think if we're not managing our woodlands, we're really missing out a bit. And right now, there's a lot of threats facing our woodlands.
And can you tell us what some of those threats are?
Certainly. Some of your listeners, certainly here in Central Kentucky, would be very familiar with the emerald ash borer, I think. I know I've heard some of your past shows, and we've talked about that here on this show, but the emerald ash borer is really devastating our ash trees across Kentucky. It started up in Michigan. It's kind of worked its way down, and it's really spreading throughout Kentucky. So that's an example of a threat. But there's other invasive insects that have come in and caused us problems as well. The gypsy moth's another example, one who threatens our oak trees. We also think about invasive plants. There's a number of invasive plants that come in and cause a lot of problems in our woodlands, such as bush honeysuckle. It was brought over as an ornamental or as a wildlife thing, and it's a really pretty plant. However, it's also extremely aggressive, and it takes over many of our woodlands, and it replaces many of our native species. So you go from a very diverse forest to a forest that not only has a few species and dominated by an invasive one, and it's really not that beneficial to wildlife either.
Okay, so there's some individuals who have either bought property or they've inherited property. And so how do they get started caring for their woodlands? Where do they go?
Right. Well, when we go through forestry school as foresters, and I am an extension forester, so I came through the University of Kentucky, got my undergrad and master's in forestry here. And really, forest management's all based on the landowner's objectives. So we try to help landowners manage their forests for whatever their goals or objectives are. And I typically will say, kind of tongue-in-cheek, as long as it's not illegal or immoral, we're going to try to help you achieve your objectives with your property.
So how do you get them to know what those are?
Right. So really you have to kind of think about what you want out of your woods. And that's unique for each of us, right? We may be interested in wildlife. We may be interested in recreational opportunities. We may just want a place of ground that we can just rest and relax and get away from the hustle and bustle of everything. So kind of renewal, a spiritual renewal as well out there. You may be interested in getting income off of it. So really what you want out of your woodlands is going to drive the management practices that are recommended and done on your property.
What are some of those management practices?
Well, one thing that's really important and often gets overlooked is the importance of our forest industry here in Kentucky. It's a roughly $13 to $14 billion industry, and that is supported really from private family forest owners because that's where that resource is at, and that returns a lot of money to individuals. It returns a lot of money to those counties and to those businesses, and it creates a lot of economic opportunity. So managing for timber production is certainly one avenue. Wildlife is another one. Many landowners get into owning their forest because they're interested in wildlife. They may want a place to hunt wildlife. They may want to be able to take photography or just to see what's out there. So wildlife is also a draw, and we can do practices that can enhance wildlife habitats so that you're more likely to be able to attract the species of interest to you. Others may be interested in some of our non-traditional products. This may be shiitake mushrooms or some of our medicinal plants such as ginseng or some of those others that are out there. There's also some food and crafts that can come from there. So there's some non-timber forest products that can be managed from our resources as well. A relatively newer program that's around is the Working Woodlands program that's been offered by the Nature Conservancy, and that's really looking at carbon credits. So, climate change is a real issue and a real concern for us, and forests are seen as a real application to address that. They serve as a sink for a lot of the carbon that's put into the atmosphere. Roughly about 15 to 16% of all the carbon that the United States pushes up is sequestered in our forests. So they play an important role in that. So the Working Woodlands program is paying landowners basically to manage and store that carbon for long haul. So it really depends. And the nice thing about forestry and forest management or woodland management is that you can get multiple objectives achieved. You don't just have to pick one thing, right? Well, you can have wildlife and you can have timber and you can have some of these non-timber forest products.
So they could do everything you just said if they wanted to.
You really can. Obviously the size of the property may limit what can be done on some of those, because some of these practices really require a little bit more land. But really, if you've got more than a few acres, you can get a number of different outcomes and objectives achieved off of that property.
Okay.
So kind of once they've determined their objectives, what would be the next step?
Okay, so thinking about what you want is certainly a first step for sure, because you're going to be talking to professionals, hopefully foresters or wildlife biologists or natural resource conservation folks that have expertise on how to manage the land in whatever condition it is to help you achieve those objectives. So one of the things that I really try to do in my job is to try to help woodland owners connect with those professionals that are out there. And there's a number of them. And when we do educational programs, often landowners are surprised of how much help is available. One that comes to mind immediately is the Kentucky Division of Forestry. It's a state agency, and they have foresters that work across the state. They're assigned to every county in Kentucky. They don't have enough of them, to be honest. They really need a lot more of them. But they're available to work with landowners one-on-one to develop management plans for their property, which can allow them to achieve their objectives much more efficiently. We also have a group that works with wildlife. The Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources have private lands biologists that are available to work with woodland owners on a one-on-one basis to achieve wildlife-related interests, whatever they may be, whether it's either hunting or photography or you just want to have more wildlife and diversity of wildlife on your species or on your property. Another group out there is Natural Resources Conservation Service. This is a federal agency, but there's units in Kentucky that are Kentucky specific, and their regional offices spread out across Kentucky, and they're really important for a number of reasons. One is they have a lot of technical expertise. If you're having water issues or things on your property, if you want to put a pond in or roads or whatever, they have the engineering capacity to help design some of that stuff. But really importantly, they help landowners offset some of those expenses related to doing management practices through the Farm Bill. And we just saw recently that the Senate passed a Farm Bill, and we're hopeful that there will be a good Farm Bill that's out there to help woodland owners, because one of the challenges we have in Kentucky in woodland management is our trees take a long time to grow and reach maturity. So the landowners are basically having to carry those costs for a long time. So the Farm Bill and other government programs are out there because they recognize the challenges that landowners have in implementing these practices and doing the work out of pocket now, and maybe having to wait 20, 30, 50 years even before they can see a return on that. And society benefits so much from having healthy forests. So it benefits us all. It's a program that's really good. So,
what are some of those benefits?
Well, if you think about forests, I think it's easy for people to think about just the pretty green out there, like the parks. So
what you see is easy to pick
the
up.
recreation, but there's a lot of other things that are maybe not so obvious. Water filtration is really important, and we see that a lot, especially like in urban areas, as we take away that forest canopy and we build more and more, and we put more blacktop and more impervious surfaces on there. We really see the the climate change and that local climate change. And there's this thing called the heat island effect, and we see it in our cities a lot. And that's really just where they heat up because they're basically absorbing all that heat throughout the day, and there's no trees or other things to kind of buffer that.
Okay.
So that's an important thing. Trees do a lot. Shade. If you're out in the sun and you walk into a woods, you'll notice that temperature is a lot
Drops.
less. Yes, it really is. So that's certainly an important one. We also think about, I mentioned earlier, carbon sequestration, being able to kind of filter the air. Leaves on trees are really like a lung. They pull in a lot of the air that's out there, and they filter that. They store some of those pollutants in their wood, but they store the carbon for sure in their wood for a long time. So not only water filtration, but really air filtration as well. Habitat is another huge one. Wildlife habitat. Certainly we think about some of the game species, but there's like deer and maybe elk now, and maybe bear someday.
Right.
But turkey and others. So there's a wide variety of game species out there that people actively hunt. But there's also a wide variety of non-game species that are really important and play a lot of important roles in these ecosystem functions. So a habitat for not only wildlife but also plants. A lot of plants live there, and other microbes and smaller things as we go down. So creating a place for biodiversity is really important for a forest, that habitat. But if you had to kind of list them again, I would say water filtration, air filtration through carbon, wildlife habitat. Those are all really significant benefits that forests provide, not only to individual landowners, but really to society overall.
You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome to Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. This is Dr. Matt Springer. For those of you who may be just joining us, each week towards the beginning of the show, we will play a wildlife sound from the forest. So here's our sound for today. Stay tuned. Towards the end of the show, we will tell you what this animal is and why it makes this sound.
Welcome back to From the Woods, Kentucky. In studio today, we have Billy Thomas. He's an extension forester in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. He is talking about resources for woodland owners. Let's get back to that interview. You mentioned earlier a lot of the invasives. So a lot of them come from different places. And I was trying to figure out, it's not that they knew that it was going to do this, right? I mean, like bush honeysuckle, probably they didn't think it was going to take over. Right. It was just something that ended up happening. So is that how most of them start? It was a nice ornamental over there, but over here it's not so much.
Good intentions and accidents really are really two ways that invasives come over. And I think it's important for our listeners to know that the United States also shares a lot of our plants with other countries. So some of our species are invasive problems in other countries. So it's not just a one-way street, right? Black locust, for example, is one of our native species that comes in areas that have been recently disturbed. It is really problematic in some parts of the world that we've shared it with. So it just really depends, on the perspective you're looking at. But we think about invasives kind of getting in here really in two ways. They're brought over intentionally, and often that is either for an ornamental purpose because it's a pretty specimen or a pretty plant. It's unique, right? It's not from here, so we're not used to seeing it. So that's an attractive reason people do it. The horticulture trade helps spread some of these, unfortunately. But we also bring them in accidentally. And we do that sometimes in packing material, or they have stowaways on the transport. We're in a global marketplace anymore. There's really no place that's untouched. So we move stuff all over the world all the time. And sometimes when we're moving these goods, there's some, maybe it's a seed or an insect or something on that packing material, and it's part of it. Some of the early packing material was made up of seeds and other plant parts that ended up being spread and distributed throughout. So we've also brought them in to serve functions too. Kudzu is a great example. Our conservation districts many years ago brought it over when we had a lot of land that was cleared and we had a lot of bare soil, and there was tremendous and legitimate concern about erosion coming from these bare lands. Some people had saw in other countries there's this great vine that kind of covers the landscape, seems to hold the soil in place, and everything's great. And it was called kudzu. And it was brought over as a soil stabilizer largely. And now we know that, it's really kind of spread and been a problem. So it happens in a variety of ways.
It could be good intentions, too.
Exactly.
It just didn't work well here. Okay.
So where should people go to find information, either online or, who should they contact to get started managing their woodlands?
Certainly. There are many resources, and I could give you a long list, but I think if you think about a few individual places to get going, it'll make it easier for the listeners. I would start if you're interested in managing your woodlands, the Kentucky Division of Forestry is the first place that we often recommend people to go to and visit. Like I said, they help you manage your property. They also sell tree seedlings. Some people may be interested in planting trees, so they have 2 nurseries here in Kentucky, and they make these seedlings available at very low cost, so it's a great opportunity to do that. So I would start with the Kentucky Division of Forestry, and a quick search on the internet will quickly find them for you. It's forestry.ky.gov if anybody's wanting to go there right directly. So that's a great organization to start with for most of our woodland owners. But if you have other interests, suppose you're just interested really primarily in wildlife, and you're maybe not as interested in timber production or some of the other goods that you can get out of our woods, then I would start with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, and they have a great website and a lot of information available for landowners to kind of get started in managing their woods. And as I mentioned earlier, they have professionals that can come out, meet with you one-on-one, and talk about what can be done on your property to help you meet your objectives. So those are 2 kind of key organizations to get landowners started. There's some others kind of as you get more experienced and more knowledgeable and you kind of know what you want to do, that can kind of take it from there and help you do some other and additional, maybe more advanced practices as well.
And then you can always go to our website. We have all these listed, and even a tab for woodland owners.
Yeah, we really do. If you go to ukforestry.org, it's our extension site for our Forestry and Natural Resources Department, and we have a plethora of information. We have links to many of these resources and agencies, and as Renee mentioned, there's a whole section dedicated just to woodland owners and many of the things that they're interested in, so that's another great starting point as well.
Yeah, and you doing what you do, basically. We also have different programs that you offer, for the woodland owners. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the Woodland Owner Short Course?
Sure. The Woodland Owner Short Course has been going on for about 13 or 14 years now. It actually started before I came on, and we've kind of changed it over the years based on feedback from people and the needs of the clients out there. But the Woodland Owner Short Course is a day-long program, and we have one of these in each of the 3 regions of Kentucky, Eastern, Central, and Western region. And we move them around each year. It's a day-long program on a Saturday. And during these programs, we do both indoor educational programming with forestry and wildlife and natural resource professionals from across the state. But we also have a field component where we go out and we look at a landowner's property and we tour that property and we look at some of the practices they've implemented. So it's really valuable for landowners to actually see these practices. It's one thing for us to talk about them in a classroom setting, but when we can get them out into the woods and they can see how they actually get implemented, some of the challenges with implementing and who can help, it really kind of solidifies what they can do with their property. And we designed that program so depending on your interest level or your previous engagement or experience, there's something for you. So we have one program that's really designed for beginning woodland owners or people that maybe don't know what they want to do with their woods or don't realize that there's resources available to help them, and that's our green track. And then we have a gold track that's available for folks that are a little more seasoned. Perhaps they already have a management plan, they've been working with a professional for a while, so we do content in there that's a little more advanced, and the idea is that there's something for everybody. So that's one of our flagship programs that we've been doing for a long time, and woodland owners every time almost they come up and say, Billy, this is a great program, and thank you so much, because we were unaware that there was so much help and so much potential that we can do with our wood. So it's a really gratifying program that, many partners are involved with that. We have over 10 organizations that support that program, some that I've already mentioned, and many others as well.
Right, and also coming up soon, we have the webinar series that we're going to be doing for woodland owners.
Yeah, more and more we have been shifting some of our program to web-based programming. It has some advantages, for sure. Certainly it's a lot less expensive for us to conduct educational programs over the internet. You don't have travel associated with that. It can save you a lot of time in that regard. So starting on February 21st, we have a series called Getting to Know Your Woodlands, and it's really targeting beginning woodland owners, and that's going to continue for each Thursday for 5 weeks, concluding on March 21st. So right now we have almost 30 county extension offices that are serving as local hosts, and you can find out more about where those are at on our website at ukforestry.org.
They can get to know that county agent that way.
Get to know that local resource. So the county agents are hosting these webinars, and the great thing about this series that we have coming up is that we've been able to tap into some of the expertise from other states as well. This is a partnership effort with other forestry extension programs in surrounding states. So we have expertise from Missouri and Tennessee and Virginia and North Carolina that will be applicable here to Kentucky, and it gives folks an opportunity to hear some regional experts as well. And I will say that last program on March 21st is all Kentucky specific. So it's only going to be Kentucky folks only and talking about specifically Kentucky programs. The other will be a little more general, but it will certainly be very applicable. So that's just an example of another kind of program that we do.
A different type.
Yeah, a different type. And I will put a shameless plug in if I can.
Go ahead.
We have a number of our webinars that we've done in the past that are already recorded, and they're posted as YouTube videos, and you can find those on our website real easy. Again, ukforestry.org. Look around there and you'll quickly find our webinars. So we've got a number of those that are already posted, and it's a great opportunity for you at no pressure, no cost. Just go on and check them out. And I think, if you're interested in woodlands and you want to know more about them or how to get the most out of them, there's a variety of kind of outlets there as far as those webinars for you to kind of learn more.
There's everything from tree ID to wildlife on there.
So there's how to sell timber if you're interested in it.
It can just get you knowledge just enough where that you could go and contact those people that you were talking about.
One of the challenges for many of our woodland owners is, they don't have training on the forest and the forest resources.
Or where to start.
Right? So that's what a lot of what we try to do is to try to raise an awareness that our forests and our woodlands are important resources, that they're worthy of attention, that they're under threat from some of those things we talked about before, and that, we need you to do something about it, right? And we try to connect you with those professionals that can kind of help you manage your property, because each one is kind of unique, right? Each property, what the landowner wants, what the history of that property is, what the owners did before you, will dictate a lot on what can be done and what's really most feasible.
Even where it is. Eastern Kentucky or Western.
Right. So we certainly deal with some different species and some different opportunities. So there's really no substitution for having a professional come out and meet with you one-on-one to tailor a plan that fits your objectives and your property so that you can achieve your objectives much quicker and much cheaper than you otherwise would. Mother Nature will grow trees for a while, but it's in an unorganized manner, if you will. So we can kind of speed up that process through a lot of our forestry knowledge of how trees respond to different treatments.
And you were mentioning, having people come up with a plan for the landowner. Can you tell the listeners what a management plan is and what might be included in a plan like that?
Yeah, Laura, that's a great point. Management plans we really think of as a starting point for many of our woodland owners, and these management plans can be thought of as a roadmap, right? If you're going on a road trip, you kind of need to know how you're going to get there, right? And we think about our objectives or goals as kind of that destination. That's what at the end, we want to achieve these goals or objectives or reach this point. And so what the plan does is it walks you through the steps to get to that point. It includes many different elements, and those elements can vary based on the needs of the woodland owner. So some of the common ones are a map of the property, and what the foresters or wildlife biologists will often do is they'll break your property up, the map, into different areas, or what we call stands or management units. And these are areas that have similar history, similar species. Maybe right now they may have similar soils, really kind of share a lot of similarities so that we can manage them as one collective unit. So that's an important element for landowners to be able to see that visually on a map, that okay, this area I can do this in, and this area I can do this. So that's an important element. Another important element of the management plan is an inventory of what you have out there. One of the challenges that our woodland owners face is the tremendous number of species that we have. There's over 100 different native tree species here in Kentucky. You contrast that with out west, where there may only be 10 or 12 species, in the whole state of native trees. And we've got 100. You could have on an acre of land 40 or 50 different species on 1 acre here in Kentucky. Wow. And each of those trees does different things at different times, and does some things better than others. So that's where that expertise really makes a big difference, because these foresters know these species. They know what they're going to be able to do based on different practices that we do to them. So it is a challenge, the diversity, but it's also a saving grace if you think about it, because if we were only all ash trees here in Kentucky,
we'd be in trouble now.
Certainly, right? So we think about our forest, maybe not think about like a mutual fund, if you will. Mutual funds invest in a lot of different stocks, to kind of spread that risk out. And our forests are made up of a lot of different tree species, so we can kind of spread that out as well.
So tell us, we've talked a lot about foresters. Explain the importance of a forester, what their training is, and why having a kind of a trained forester is important for somebody to take a look at their land.
Okay, so foresters it's a professional degree that we have here at UK, and what that means is it's been accredited by the Society of American Foresters. In essence, that means it's met a minimum standards of different coursework and different topic areas that have been covered that the Society of American Foresters deems critical, and UK has that program here, and each state has an accredited program that puts out foresters. But landowners can benefit from the coursework that the foresters take. We learn how to identify the trees. We learn all about where they grow, where they're most successful, and what you do to kind of get them to do what you want them to do. We learn about the wildlife that inhabit the forest and what kind of requirements they have. We learn about the water resources on the forest and how to manage those and the impacts that forest management activities can have on water quality. Increasingly, our students are getting really good at GIS, Geographic Information Systems, to where they can do a number of different layers, soils layers, and different types of tree layers on a map, and help landowners understand what they have. We're also educated in the threats that our forests are facing, whether it be invasive insects, invasive plants, wildfire, and how that you can manage your woods in ways to kind of make them more robust and more resilient against some of those threats. So there's just a few examples of that coursework and that knowledge that landowners can benefit from these foresters that have been trained here at UK and in other forestry schools across the United States.
So if someone were to contact the Kentucky Division of Forestry, what kind of services would they provide them?
Sure. There are a number of different services that the Kentucky Division of Forestry provides, and I'll have to, another shameless plug, I think it's a great organization. I had a chance to work for them for a little while before I came to this current position, and it's made up of a lot of great women and men out there trying to help our landowners across Kentucky. So you contact your local Kentucky Division of Forestry office, and you let them know that you're interested in managing your property and you would like some assistance with that. And that'll trigger a series of events that will happen. You'll be connected with a forester, and that forester will talk with you starting out on the phone to try to get a sense what you're interested in doing with your property. Then they'll set up a meeting with you where they come out and visit you on your property, and I highly recommend that landowners be present and be part of that. You need to be active in your woods to get the most out of them. So the forester will come out, they will evaluate your property, back to that management plan. They'll look at an inventory, they'll pull up some maps, some GIS maps and other resources resources, and then they'll take your objectives as a landowner, what you're trying to achieve from your property, and they'll meld that all together. So you'll have your objectives, you'll have the property and its history and what's on it currently, and then they'll take all of that and they can make recommendations, or what we call prescriptions, to do practices that will move you toward your objectives. Not only can they give you that expertise in that regard, they can also connect you with a variety of educational and financial assistance programs that are out there. We partner a lot with the Division of Forestry, and they partner a lot with the Kentucky Natural Resources Conservation Service, who has some of those Farm Bill related programs I was talking about. So there's some funding to help do some of these practices. And if you're interested in tree planting, they can help get you tree seedlings from their nurseries. Many of them also have tree setters. If you're planting in open fields or things like that where you can get a tractor and you can move those, you can probably borrow one of their tree setters and they'll help you lay out the tree planting. If you're just interested in treating invasive plants, they can help you do that too. So really their assistance is going to be based on what you're trying to achieve out of your property.
Mm-hmm. So there's also a consulting foresters. So can you explain a little bit about them?
Certainly. We have Kentucky Association of Consulting Foresters here in Kentucky, and it's part of the ACF, the Association of Consulting Foresters here in the United States. And each state has a chapter, and our chapter here in Kentucky is KACF, and you can find them at kacf.org and find more about them. But these are professional foresters that work solely as foresters. They're not also working for a sawmill, or they don't have another job doing something else. Their sole job has to be working in forestry and forest management, and they can't have any conflicting interests. They have a code of ethics that they have to adhere to, minimum educational standards, and you have to be vetted by other members. So it's a group that we work a lot with. We have a lot of confidence in the foresters that are part of that because we know the training that they have to go to. We know the standards that they have to uphold. And so this group is available to work with landowners just like the Kentucky Division of Forestry is, but these are private businessmen right now. Unfortunately, we don't have any women right now, so there's an opportunity for some of our women foresters to be consultant foresters here in Kentucky, but they will work for you as a client. So you'll contact a consultant forester, and they will work for you on a fee basis or a commission basis, and so sometimes they can get to you a lot quicker than the Division of Forestry can. One area where they really separate themselves and really help landowners is when it comes to timber sales. Landowners interested in selling timber from their property are often at a disadvantage because they don't know what they have, right? They don't know what species they have. They don't know what it's worth. They don't know who's buying it. They don't know what the market is today or what it's going to be near future. So those put them at a distinct disadvantage. Consulting foresters have that knowledge, right? They know who's looking for what. They know how the market's moving. They know who the local buyers are. They can also appraise your property and give you an estimate of what its value is. So when you get that knock on the door of somebody wanting to buy your timber and they offer you a price, you've at least got some idea, is this, in the ballpark, right? So that's a service that they can provide. They can also, they do a lot of things that the Division of Forestry can't do, and timber sales is one of them. The Division of Forestry does not get involved in timber sales at that level as far as managing the timber sale process for you. They can do an inventory for you and tell you what you got, but that's about where they can stop. And then the consultant foresters can basically do a turnkey operation and do the whole timber sale, show potential buyers, help advertise it, vet loggers or others to make sure that you're getting somebody that you're going to be content with on your property, oversee the contract and any negotiations that have to take place. So they can do a lot in the timber sale range. They also do a lot on court cases when it comes to timber trespassing. Timber trespassing is, it doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. And sometimes it's intentional, resulting in timber theft, and other times it's unintentional. But if you're a landowner and you've had somebody cut on your property and they weren't supposed to cut your trees, then a consultant forester can kind of help you guide through what was taken, what its value was, and help navigate kind of the court system to help you kind of receive restitution for your losses. Another area they can help is establishing timber basis, and that's basically the value of the forest at the time that you bought it, which has really important tax implications down the road. So those are a few ways that they differentiate themselves from our state foresters that we have. But they can also develop management plans as well and make recommendations on prescriptions on what you should do.
Yeah, I know some of those boundaries are a little bit shaded because it's like it used to be, go over to that tree with the fence post next to it, and some of those aren't the easiest places to find.
Yes, if you've navigated around some of the hills in Kentucky,
Exactly.
you will quickly realize that it is a challenge. It really is, and some of those landmarks that are in deeds are no longer there.
Right.
So it is a challenge, and the foresters can help you. Now, they're not surveyors. There are professional surveyors out there, and sometimes landowners do need that. But they can still help you kind of identify your boundaries as such.
Well, Billy, thank you so much for coming in today. And before we go, you've presented us with a lot of information for our listeners. Is there kind of one takeaway item that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah.
Or 2 or 3.
Yeah.
It's so much
Well,
information.
I know, and I hope I've not flooded you all with too
No,
much
it's great.
information. But what I would say is that our forests or woodlands are extremely important. Right, they cover half the state. They cover 1/3 of the United States and approximately 1/3 of the entire globe. So forests cover a lot of our land. They're really important. They do a lot for us. Things that we don't think about often. Like I mentioned earlier, the water and the air filtration, the biodiversity habitat. Those are really important functions that our forests provide. So treat your forest as an asset. If you're a forest landowner, treat them as an asset. Get professional help. There's a tremendous amount of help available to help you manage your forest. And there's also some financial assistance available to help offset some of those costs. So take home message, forests are important, right? They're worthy of our attention. And get some professional help to get the most out of them, to make them as healthy and as productive as they possibly can be. And if you ever have any more questions, visit us at ukforestry.org, and we'd be happy to try to get you pointed in the right direction.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Billy, for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So if you'd like more information on what you heard in this segment of today's show, you can visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org. Stay tuned now for Wildlife Sounds from the Forest.
Welcome to Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. This is Dr. Matt Springer. This week we have a guest with us to talk about the sound we heard earlier. Today we have Lori Thomas, Extension Forester within the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, and she's going to tell us all about this sound that you hear now.
Okay, so what was that sound?
All right, isn't that a great sound?
Yes, it was.
And that is the call, not the song, but the call of the white-breasted nuthatch. And it's it's a small songbird, year-round resident. We'll see them here year-round.
So
in
they don't
Kentucky.
leave. Okay,
they do not leave. They might migrate, regionally, but for the most part, these little fellows will stay around year-round here. They're like I said, a smallish songbird. Just a little bit about the call first, because that's probably what you might first notice this bird. And what we heard is the call. It's that kind of that nasal yank 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 yank, and it's just kind of chatting with other nuthatches out in the area. They'll usually repeat this a few times in a row, as you noticed in the call. And both male and female make this call. Like whereas usually with a song, a mating song, which we wouldn't be hearing this time of year for the white-breasted nuthatch, that's usually the male that will be singing. But with this call, these are the male and the female. Both nuthatches make this call. This is what if you're out taking a hike, or even if you have feeders out in your backyard and you kind of hear something that sounds just like that yank 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 sound. Take a look out, because they do come to your feeders, but you'll see they can be out in the woods as well. And most likely, that's how I first encountered a nuthatch, was like, what on earth is that? I think I was hiking at McConnell Springs before I started birding, going, what on earth is that sound?
Right.
Got some binoculars, looking around, and found him. And they're really interesting little birds. Like I said, they're it's a songbird. It's about sparrow size, about 5 to 6 inches long. And they have dark gray, bluish gray uppers, which means that's, from the head down their back. And the male will have a nice black crisp cap. The females will be gray. And their faces usually all white and have a black bill. And they'll have all white underparts, all their breast and whatnot, and black feet and legs. And they're really interesting. They're very pretty, very sharp looking birds, but they're also interesting. So you may hear them, and then once you hear them, start looking around, because it's fun to watch them as they forage for food. They're a bird that stays close to that tree while they're foraging. These are the ones you'll see walking up and down, kind of creeping up and down a trunk of a tree.
Oh my goodness, kind of like Spider-Man.
Exactly. I mean, up and down.
Up and
it's
down.
Really neat. And when they're in search of food, they'll be out on your branches. They've been known, you can see them sometimes walking even upside down.
Oh my, that would be interesting to see.
So they do. They're fun to watch, and they do, of course, they fly and everything, but you can watch these birds once you find them in a tree. Watch them for a little bit. They're going to spend a little bit of time looking for food, foraging for food. And, for these, since they're year-round residents right now, what they're foraging for are seeds and nuts. Because they also, in the warmer months, they eat insects as well. But this time of year, it's seeds and nuts that they're out foraging for, which makes it nice if you've got bird feeders, because these guys might visit your bird feeder because you'll have, black oiled sunflower seeds in there or something that would attract them as well. They're fun to watch. Even as they come to your bird feeder, they're going to come grab that seed, and then they're going to disappear with it. Follow, see if you've got trees nearby, see if you can find them, because what nuthatches do, which is kind of where they get their name from, is they'll take whatever seed they found and they'll jam it in a crevice of a tree in the bark somewhere, and then they're going to sit there and hammer at it until they hatch open that seed or that nut, exactly, with their bills. So that's nuthatch.
Right.
It's kind of cool.
Right.
But so they're a great little bird to watch, kind of fun. They usually, when you're out in the woods, you'll notice if you do see them, they're going to be a lot of times within a flock of other birds, mixed other birds, usually Carolina chickadees and tufted titmice, and both very chatty birds. More than likely, and in the wintertime, you're going to see them in these kind of mixed flocks, probably for protection from predators.
I was going to ask, is there a reason why they hang with those birds?
Exactly, yeah, so probably for protection. Nuthatches are kind of focusing in on that bark and along that tree trunk, whereas our chickadees and our titmice are kind of moving around a little bit more, and they tend to be very observant and alertful to other birds if there are predators nearby. So kind of look, you hear a bunch of little birds moving around, look to see if you see a nuthatch in that group. Another fun fact about a nuthatch, I always like to do this talking about, groups of animals have names. Like we have a pod of whales, or you have a mob or a murder of crows. A group of them. For nuthatches, a group of nuthatches, if you see a group of nuthatches, you have just seen a get of nuthatches.
A jar.
Of nuthatches, I know. Right? It's kind of interesting. But hopefully you're going to be out in the woods this winter. It's great. Get to one of our natural areas nearby, or even, just get out in your yard a little bit. And hopefully you'll get to hear one of these. Listen for them. Listen to that call, that little yank, 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 yank sound. Sorry, I can't do bird calls, but
it's all right.
Listen for that, and look for this great year-round little bird of ours that we have here in Kentucky.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you coming in.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky. If you have any questions about things that you heard on today's show, please visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org. Stay tuned each Thursday from 10 to 11 a.m. for another edition of From the Woods, Kentucky.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this podcast from WRFL Lexington, you may enjoy our live radio stream at WRFL.FM and, of course, via radio at 88.1 FM in the central Kentucky area. We have a wide variety of programs you're sure to enjoy. Just go to WRFL.FM/schedule and see what programs appeal most to you. Thanks again for listening to this podcast from WRFL Lexington.